Good evening there, everybody. What is happening? Hopefully, you all are having a wonderful day today. So, when it comes down to it, I thought, of course, that I would review this little video and talk about this subject that I thought would be very particularly interesting. And this is going to be a video, I believe, by the boxing channel known as BRUCE MF VANE. And I didn't want to review this video, at first because I wanted to kind of talk about Lomachenko's career kind of as a standalone because of course, for those of you that did not hear about the news, Vasyl Lomachenko, or Vasyl Lomachenko, however you want to pronounce his name, who of course at one point in time not only was looked at as one of the best pound-for-pound fighters, but at one point in time as the best pound-for-pound fighter, he recently announced his retirement, I believe at about 37 years of age. And, in my personal view, that pretty much was the correct decision to do because Vasyl Lomachenko, the only fights that he really had available to him were going to be the very big fights either against Tank Davis or Shakur Stevenson or, some of those guys, Keyshawn Davis, and at his age, and on top of that, probably already not belonging at that weight class in the first place, it was only going to be a matter of time to where he was, to be quite honest with you, gonna either lose another fight, in my personal view, or potentially lose to a couple of those guys. Now, maybe had it been a few years ago, or maybe had it been, during more of his peak years, maybe he could have beat those guys, but, we'll never know. But I think that the fact that we will never know is better for Lomachenko's career, at least overall, strategically thinking about it, when we take a look at the arguments of him later on, than what we would know for sure, at least if he lost to them during older age. Because even if you do lose during older age, there still would be many debates that you still lost to that guy. So, I mean, it is what it is. But the reason why I wanted to review this little video right here, I thought it was very particularly interesting because BRUCE MF VANE here, who of course is a channel that is somewhat along, aligned with the LDBC and new media. Vasyl Lomachenko's career was always going to be very interesting when he retired, especially from the perspective of a lot of these LDBC and new media channels. And of course, for those of you that have been on my channel for a long time, you know that a lot of my channel is based on, kind of addressing narratives, especially narratives that I find to be false or have double standards or tend to, kind of have revisionist history. So with a certain amount of the LDBC and new media channels, which is basically a pro-black cult, and I understand once again that, a lot of people that they're not going to like that, but basically a lot of those channels, what they represent is the very bitter and the very highly emotional, black fan base within that of boxing, and also a certain amount of, those people within America that believe that they've been marginalized or victims of racism or, of course, put on with double standards and, unfair treatment, which of course, to a degree is very, very true. But of course, this has led to a lot of them being very, very bitter. It's almost like a woman that, they have a whole bunch of terrible relationships because of the men that they ended up choosing. And then now all of a sudden there's just no good men anymore. Now, of course, is that comparison completely accurate? Because is it, a lot of these guys' fault that they ended up suffering a lot of the mistreatment that they ended up getting, or seeing a lot of the black fighters get mistreated the way that they got mistreated? No. But the point being is that it is very important that we don't get embittered by a lot of the experiences overall that we end up having. Not me stating overall that's, that there's definitely not going to be racism out there or that there's not going to be racialism or racial favoritism. But the point being is that if we're going to address things honestly and logically, we have to be very sure not to address it from a place of bitterness. But it is what it is. But anyways, let's get into it. Let's see what this gentleman has to say here. I just thought that it was going to be very particularly interesting, but let's go over Vasyl Lomachenko's career. But it's very obvious that this dude, the way that he talks about Lomachenko, that he's very bitter. The way that the media tried to push Lomachenko very early on, especially when he was looked at as the #1 pound-for-pound fighter. But anyways, let's get into it. Let's see what the man has to say.
So Vasyl High-Tech Lomachenko retires. It's not like this is shocking. It's not like we didn't know. We knew that he wanted to retire. We knew what him taking these breaks was actually about. But as his career has now come to a close, you're going to look back on Vasyl Lomachenko's career, and this is what I talk about with all fighters. When it ends, how it looks. Because you can dance and you can parade in front of us and do all the theatrics and the pretending, but this is the one thing I like about boxing. In the end, what you did will shine through, good or bad. The facade will not carry when your career ends. So,
Well, actually, I don't personally agree with that. Oftentimes, actually, what I personally find within sports, and not just within sports, but many avenues, is that the facade oftentimes will carry on much longer than what the actual truth is. And not just within sports, but also politics, or how a politician over what they did for the potential good of society, or what they were truly about, or all this other stuff, or, other people that you may see in the media, or, in other art forms, whatever it may personally be. I oftentimes, find that the facade or that the lie is oftentimes, standing much more ground than what the actual truth is. And that's why even when you take a look at a fighter like a Mike Tyson, for example, a fighter that basically ended up losing almost every super fight in his career, other than that of Michael Spinks, Mike Tyson is still debated by many as not just the greatest heavyweight of all time, but the greatest fighter of all time. So I mean, that narrative of a lot of the times the facade will not carry your career. Actually, I don't agree. I think that the facade oftentimes does carry a lot in people's career. Also, with other fighters such as Oscar De La Hoya or Tommy Hearns, certain guys like that. Oscar De La Hoya, for whatever reason, he's put on many lists as a top 10 greatest fighter of all time. I have no idea why, because pretty much every fight after that of 135, when he fought someone a similar size, he never really beat anybody, at least, not a lot of the bigger names. And when it came to Tommy Hearns, it was pretty much very similar. I mean, he still, of course, became, I believe, one of the first, four-weight division champions or something like that. Even a five-weight division champion, if you want to count his cruiserweight title. But I mean, that's up to you. But like those two fighters, for example, when they usually fought fighters near their same size that were very talented, they usually lost. But they're still counted as either top 10 or top 20 greatest fighters of all time, which, in my personal view, both Tommy Hearns and Oscar De La Hoya, neither of them would be in my top 20 of all time list. Neither of them.
when a person's career ends, no matter how much they might try to dress them up, that's when most people honestly look at boxers' careers and be truthful about what they did or what they didn't do. So that's why I tell people think about you may get it now, but in the end, you can't cover up cherry picking. Not when you close the books on your career, all that stuff comes back up that you thought that you got away with and what the media helped you get away with.
Well, sometimes, or sometimes, once again, the narrative will be that, it even, strengthens by tenfold once they end up retiring. I mean, how many times have we heard about the media hating a particular fighter, a black fighter in particular? Overall, that fighter was, crazy, or that fighter was a criminal, or that fighter overall ducked this and that person. But then for the next generation, they say, oh, that person never ducked anybody. Muhammad Ali was one of the most hated athletes of all time during his time, at least for a certain amount of time. But then 20 years later on, what the narrative was is that Ali never avoided anybody, that Ali took on all comers. And I mean, not to state that Ali didn't fight a lot of the greater names, of course, but that's not necessarily the case. For people that don't know, Ali, there was a time where he was kind of avoiding the Ken Norton fight. And he actually, at least, for the rematch. And, Ali, or I think the trilogy fight or something like that, he actually asked George Foreman to come back because he knew that he would have a very hard time in defeating that of a Ken Norton. And I think even for a time, he kind of led on the idea of a rematch for George Foreman, but even he did not want to do that as well. But the thing is about Muhammad Ali is that you ask people about him today, and basically he's untouchable in terms of a narrative standpoint. So I mean, thing is that although a lot of people, they state all this stuff about how the facade, how it won't. Actually, I don't agree with that. Once again, oftentimes in sports, what you'll find is that the facade is oftentimes much bigger, or the narrative is much bigger than the actual truth.
So as you look at Lomachenko's career, as I'm looking at it, I'm looking at to see what does his career say, what has he done, what I'm saying, what he should have did. I'm just looking over overall. And overall, what comes to my mind is a complete dud.
Right. Well, for any of us that actually know boxing, we definitely know that Lomachenko's career is not a complete dud. But the reason why he's saying it's a complete dud is because, first of all, I think that he's comparing it to the standards of, say, maybe other fighters like Terrence Crawford or Alexander Usyk or maybe a Canelo Alvarez. And this guy also hates Canelo Alvarez. But I mean, the thing, and listen, I understand some of the criticism he lays upon certain fighters like Canelo Alvarez, but in my view, just it goes a little bit too far. But the thing is that Lomachenko's career is definitely not a complete dud. Now, can we make arguments that he wasn't quite as great or as impactful as maybe what some of the media sites or maybe what ESPN try to label him as, or that they did it a little bit too early? Sure, absolutely. But I mean, this has happened with a multitude of athletes. It's not like Lomachenko is the only one. Adrian Broner, when he was a four-weight division champion and hadn't really defeated any A-grade names, people were already labeling him as the next Floyd Mayweather. So I mean, the thing is that the reason why Lomachenko, a part of the reason, really the main reason why, they're so pissed off about Lomachenko's prior ranking is because he was a Caucasian fighter, and a lot of the black, LDBC and new media fan base, they believe that Lomachenko was basically getting benefits or bennies or that he basically was being ranked because he was a Caucasian fighter, and that a lot of black fighters were being ranked under him unfairly. And I get it, but at the end of the day, Lomachenko at one point in time, he was debated as the number one pound for pound fighter, and he did deserve to be in that debate. But we're going to talk about that as it goes along.
Lomachenko's career was a dud. And it's because he's one of the most artificial fighters that I've ever got to see be built.
No, Lomachenko is not one of the most artificial fighters that has ever been built. Don't get it twisted. Am I stating that Lomachenko has not gotten opportunities, that he hasn't gotten vacant title shots, or that, he hasn't gotten title shots that maybe other people overall, would not have gotten, like when he got the title shot, against Gary Russell Jr., in his next fight, when he suffered the loss against Orlando Salido previously? Yeah, of course. But at the end of the day, like, just to allege that Lomachenko's career is just completely artificial, no. The fighters that, if we really want to go there, that are really way more artificial would be certain guys like that of a Deontay Wilder. Like, it's no offense against Deontay Wilder, and I would not even say that his career would be a quote-unquote dud. But Deontay Wilder, for example, like when you talk about a fighter that is legitimately artificial, that's a fighter that is legitimately artificial, because when you talk about the 10 title defenses of Deontay Wilder, most people can't even name you 3 of his title defenses other than maybe Luis Ortiz and Tyson Fury. That's really about it. I mean, he fought Chris Arreola when he was completely washed, and even the best version of Chris Arreola was never really that good. He fought Artur Spiltzka, Eric Molina, like a whole bunch of bums, to be quite honest with you. Like, that was a fighter who really, when you talk about his narrative, especially from a lot of the LDBC and new media, whenever they tried to debate that he was the best heavyweight in the world, that's someone overall that was completely artificial. At least when you talk about in terms of their record. And even I would not state that Wilder is completely artificial, because he still deserved that WBC heavyweight championship. He just didn't defend it against anybody. But I mean, other than Luis Ortiz, he didn't defend it against, shit for contenders other than Luis Ortiz or Tyson Fury. And the one fight that he really did fight against a guy that could really compete against him in his peak years, he lost to, and lost to badly. But I mean, it is what it is. But Lomachenko, no.
In my time, I'm not saying artificial as far as boxing skill. Of course, Lomachenko had boxing skill, but that's just it. He had skill and he was a good fighter, but he was just a good little fighter.
Well, Lomachenko, in my view, was a great fighter. Here's the thing. There's multiple levels when you talk about boxing. There are great fighters, and then there are all-time grade level fighters. I'm not quite sure if Lomachenko would ever, in my view, quite reach the level of an all-time grade level fighter. Now, the all-time grade level fighters of this era, in my view, would be Alexander Usyk, Canelo Alvarez, and Terrence Bud Crawford. But if we're really also going to go there about Crawford, it's no offense, but I mean, other than Errol Spence and Sean Porter, what are we really taking a look at in terms of his career? I mean, I will give him Victor Postal and, Madrimov and Gamboa, but I mean, once again, Terrence Crawford, especially from a lot of these channels, I mean, the LDBC, to be fair, they did kind of criticize his resume for a while. But I mean, Crawford, to be quite honest with you, he kind of, people kind of talk about his resume being way greater than what it really actually is. And to be quite honest with you, it's probably because he's one of the more elite black fighters of the era. And black fighters, especially from America, are oftentimes looked at as having an elite level resume. Crawford doesn't really have, an all-time grade level resume. And if we're honestly going to go there, Lomachenko probably has more confirmed A-grade level names on his resume than Terrence Crawford. Now, that being stated, Crawford did win his big matchup against Errol Spence, so I don't think that Lomachenko can really ever be debated above that of a Terrence Bud Crawford. But, a big part of the reason for the bitterness from a lot of these channels is because they believe that Terrence Bud Crawford was getting shortchanged from a lot of quote unquote old media when Lomachenko was being ranked above him. But keep in mind that at that time, Terrence Crawford hadn't even fought Sean Porter yet. So I'm sorry, but no. Because when you talk about Lomachenko, at that time, he was facing a lot of names that people would have knew. Like, he wasn't just fighting Roman Rocky Martinez. Like, when he was finally debated as the number one pound for pound, you're talking about a guy that not only was exceptionally skilled at the time, but a guy that had defeated, I believe, Gary Russell Jr., who would eventually become one of the more elite black champions in the sport. Nicholas Walters, who of course knocked out Nonito Donaire and was, a great champion, I believe, at 130. And then of course, also defeated that of Guillermo Rigondeaux and also ended up defeating that of Jorge Linares. So I mean, Lomachenko was running through a lot of guys. It's not like he was just defeating bums. But anyway.
Had limits. He was never where they tried to place him.
Well, I mean, you can debate that if you want to talk about quote unquote all time greatness, if you want to talk about that, but does that mean that your career is really a dud? I mean, come on. So once again, it's no offense against BRUCE MF VANE here. He makes some videos that in my view, he brings up some relative good points, but is no offense here, but he kind of just comes across as a bitter SOB here, because Lomachenko was a Caucasian fighter and he believes that he was placed in certain areas because, of his complexion. And I get it, but, like I said, some people, they just go too far with it.
And that's why I love, in the end, you can really see all the bullshit that they were talking. They tried to place him. And that's why I love, in the end, you can really see all the bullshit that they were talking. Or all the credit somebody tried to take away. That's what happens in the end. And when you look at Vasyl Lomachenko,
now you hear overall, overall when he says taking all the credit that, taking all the credit that they tried to take away. Now I need to rewind that and see overall what perspective he means. Hold on.
All the bullshit that they were talking, or all the credit somebody tried to take away. That's what happens in the end.
And now, what he's stating there, it's possible that he's talking about people taking away credit from Lomachenko's career at the end of his career. But what I pretty much take that as is that a lot of people taking credit away from that of black fighters on the pound per pound list when BRUCE MF VANE here doesn't believe that Lomachenko should have ever been ranked above them. And listen, I understand, but once again, just logically talking about it, at the end of the day, when Lomachenko became a three-weight division champion over Jorge Linares, yes, he finally did deserve that spot at the number one spot. Is what it is. People can like that, they can not like that. But at the end of the day, Crawford, by the time he became a three-weight division champion, the three biggest names on his resume were Postol, Gamboa, and Jeff Horn. And to be quite honest with you, it's a debate if 2 or 3 of those fighters are even A-grade level fighters in the first place. Sorry, but it is what it is.
When you look at Vasyl Lomachenko and what he has done, a lot of people may try to build him up and say he's been what? He's done what? What? Because everything that people could try to build him up off of, I can show was artificial. Like, what are you going to say about his career? What did Loma do? He didn't become undisputed. Oh, well, you could say that he unified. You could say that he unified with vacant belts. Check his resume. Oh,
right, but just because Lomachenko didn't unify a weight class, does that mean that his career is a quote-unquote dud? Like I said, it is no offense against BRUCE MF VANE here, but this dude just comes across as an emotional wreck and someone that is very bitter. And when someone is very, very bitter, oftentimes, they let that impact, their analyzation. It just is what it is. So you cannot rely on someone's analyzation who is quote unquote bitter. Just can't do it. And it's no offense, but this guy is bitter to a capital B.
Oh, well, he's the fastest three-weight champ. No, that's not true at all. That was saying sack. So they lied about that. That's why they stopped saying it.
Well, I mean, when you talk about a fighter that was the quickest three-weight division champion against real level competition, you're talking about Lomachenko. I'm not quite sure who the hell the other guy is, but at the end of the day, when you talk about the quickest fighter to a three-weight division champion against real A-grade level competition, at least at times, yes, it was Lomachenko. Because when you talk about, I believe at 126, he defeated Gary Russell Jr. When you talk about at 130, I believe he defeated Nicholas Walters. Of course, he defeated Rigondeaux. Now, Rigondeaux, of course, was not really supposed to be at that weight class, but Rigondeaux had been calling him out for a while. And keep in mind that a lot of the LDBC and new media channels, they were claiming that Lomachenko was avoiding Rigondeaux, even though Rigondeaux was, I believe 2 or 3 weight classes below Loma, but Rigondeaux was calling him out so often, and so many people were claiming that Lomachenko was avoiding him, and a lot of people looked at Rigondeaux as unbeatable at the time, that when the fight finally did happen, basically what a lot of these guys claimed, a lot of the bitter LDBC and the media, all they claimed was that, oh, well, Lomachenko, he just fought a guy that was, really small. So, I mean, point is that these guys just would have not been happy with anything. But, once again, to put it in proper perspective, Lomachenko did fight a few really good A-grade level names in his career. Now, is he on the same level as guys like Canelo or Usyk or Crawford for his generation? No. But, I mean, Lomachenko's about a level below those guys. He's someone that, does deserve to be a future first ballot Hall of Famer, no doubt about it. And he's someone overall that is a great fighter or was a great fighter. Is he someone that, in my view, is an all-time great level fighter? No, probably not. But, I mean, there are plenty of fighters that I would say that are great fighters that weren't all-time great level fighters. But, I mean, even, if you were to debate certain fighters such as Sugar Shane Mosley debatably as, all-time great, one could debate that Lomachenko deserves to be right there. Because, I mean, is Sugar Shane Mosley really someone that's truly above that of Vasyl Lomachenko? It's not like Sugar Shane Mosley was someone that was, completely unbeatable. He lost. He lost to Vernon Forrest. He lost overall, I believe. I personally thought that he lost to Oscar De La Hoya rematch, but he also lost to Miguel Cotto. He lost to some other guys. So if you consider certain guys like Miguel Cotto or Oscar De La Hoya or Sugar Shane Mosley as all-time great, I mean, Lomachenko is about on the same level as some of those guys. And I know that some people are going to highly disagree with me, and I know I'm going to get some guys in here to say, how could you say that? De La Hoya defeated Pernell, CP Whitaker, and Chavez. Right, but, what does that really mean? There's no offense against De La Hoya, but it's like, you defeat those two guys who you were clearly bigger than. Like, you're talking about Sweet Pea, who's like, what, 5'7", Chavez, 5'7", 5'6". They're really guys that belong more at 135 or 140, and you end up beating those guys. But then when you face legit fighters that are your own same size, like Shane Mosley or Felix Tito Trinidad or, some of those other guys, you end up losing. I mean, it is what it is.
And if I might note, they stopped saying it.
Right. Now, I'm not going to claim that Lomachenko is quite on the same level as, say, an Oscar De La Hoya or a Cotto or a Mosley because, he probably didn't have as lengthy of a career. But it's not something that, in my view, would just be non-debatable.
After I put it out there to the public, you know what I'm saying? But y'all probably missed it. But that's why they don't say the fastest 3-way world champion in history no more. I'm going to take sole credit for that. Because they were saying it up until I blew it out. Just saying. But, what else? He didn't jump up no weight classes. He didn't beat no...
Well, how can you not jump up no weight classes and you're a 3-weight division champion? That doesn't make any sense. I think what he's trying to say is that Lomachenko didn't jump up the weight classes like what a Roberto Duran did with Sugar Ray Leonard or a Mosley did with De La Hoya or what a Crawford's doing with Canelo. But do you have to do that in order to be an all-time grade level fighter? I mean, or to be a grade level fighter? Even if we don't put Lomachenko on the all-time grade level, once again, how many fighters do we know within the history of boxing that are considered great fighters or even all-time grade level fighters, and they didn't do some of this stuff? Like, when you talk about, once again, someone like, even a Sugar Shane Mosley. Did Shane Mosley become completely undisputed in any particular weight class? I don't remember that he did. Maybe he did at 135 where he was severely dominant, but I don't remember that. Did Sugar Shane Mosley, was he a guy that won every big fight in his career? Obviously not, because he lost several fights in his career. So, I mean, it's like, it's whatever.
Truly spectacular fighters. He doesn't truly have a standout fight. His standout fight is a loss. So
no, that's not true at all. And this has been another narrative to basically, once again, try to put Lomachenko as someone that, was just this big, great white hype. No, that's false. Now, if you want to claim that 2 of the bigger wins in his career or the 2 biggest fights in his career were losses, that's something that you could state against Teofimo Lopez and Devin Haney. Now, to be fair, Lomachenko probably was at least a weight class or 2 smaller than those guys naturally because he's not a guy that really is anywhere near, he's not above a 130-pounder. Devin Haney, at the very least, is a 140-pounder. I mean, the dude rehydrates literally at 165. which is insane for, 140 and 135. But I mean, it is what it is. And Tio's probably more of a natural 140 guy. But one definitely can criticize Lomachenko for losing those fights. However, of course, what a lot of people would debate is that he could have debatably got the decision over Haney. And although I don't mind that the fight went to Haney, it was definitely a fight that, in my view, could have went either way. And for Lomachenko's size disadvantage in that fight, and also his age, it was pretty impressive that he was able to do that. But once again, even if you want to talk about those two losses, Lomachenko does have the fights against Nicholas Walters, Guillermo Regendao, Jorge Linares, George Kambosos, although Kambosos was at a lower point in his career at that time. And of course, he also has that win over Gary Russell. So to say that Lomachenko doesn't have any standout wins, all that is propaganda.
What did he do in boxing? What now?
Well, what Lomachenko did in boxing was that he was a three-weight division champion. I believe being a Ring magazine champion in all three of those weight classes. Now, if I'm wrong about that, someone correct me. But he also was able to get wins over guys like Nicholas Walters, Jorge Linares, Guillermo Regendao, Gary Russell Jr., and George Kambosos. That's what he was able to do. He also was able to beat a multitude of other champions or, fighters that would be looked at as B, maybe debatable A-grade level names. Like a Jermaine Ortiz, who was never a champion, but someone very talented. And some other guys out there like Jose Pedraza or, some of the other guys out there. On top of that, he was able to, once again, be a three-weight division champion. And when you talk about fighting legit level competition, he probably did it the quickest. Now, that other guy, whoever he mentioned, perhaps he did do it in quicker fashion, but the fact that I've never heard of that guy just lets me know alone that more than likely he's probably not worth, talking about. But anyway. And on top of that, Lomachenko one time was in the debate, and the proper debate, for being the number one pound for pound fighter. So Lomachenko definitely has a career that's worth remembering, but what one can definitely make the debate about is that, the two biggest fights of his career that he did lose. So, I mean, that does have to be a part of the package. It's not like Lomachenko's package is completely holeless, at the end of the day. But, I mean, the thing is that this dude is, putting a little bit of extra mustard on it. But it's obvious that he's been waiting for this day for a very long time to, try and completely diminish Lomachenko's career.
This is where it becomes even better. What did he do to be on the pound-for-pound list for 5 years? Yeah. A guy with, how many fights he got? 13? 15 fights or something?
Right, but by the time that Lomachenko had 13 fights, Lomachenko overall, I believe by his 13th fight, he was able to beat Jorge Linares. So that's what a lot of people don't understand. Now, Lomachenko was debated as the number one pound-for-pound fighter, I think with 13 total fights. And of course, a certain amount of people took that as disrespect. They said, how could you put a fighter with 13 total fights? Right, but no offense. And once again, a lot of people overall, they were really pissed off because Crawford had a lot more fights and all this other stuff. No offense. No one cares about you fighting all those bums at 140. I don't care if you fight 20 times at a weight class, but the opponents that you're fighting are Hank Lundy and Felix Diaz and Derry Jean. No one gives a shit. It is what it is. The best names that Crawford ever fought at 140 were Victor Postal, Joyous Ndongo, and I mean, maybe like one other fighter. And to be honest with you, most of those fighters were B or C grade level competition. Period. Is what it is. All right. And so a lot of those fighters will never even touch a title. All right. So when you talk about, and even some of the fighters that did touch a title, like Joyce Ndongo wasn't no fucking A grade level fighter. Like, give me a break.
Yeah. What did he do to get on the pound for pound list for 5 straight years?
Well, when Lomachenko once again was, I believe, at 130 pounds, he was able to defeat that of a Nicholas Walters. Of course, he also had a recognition for defeating Gary Russell Jr. And on top of that, he would defeat Guillermo Regendao. One could also ask the question, what was Guillermo Regendao doing on the pound-for-pound list for that long? Because even though he defeated Nonito Donaire, which of course was a top 5 pound-for-pound win at the time, he didn't really defeat anyone else in his career. So, I mean, the point is that Lomachenko, believe it or not, did a lot more in his career than what Guillermo Regendao did and what some of those other lightweight class fighters did. So this argument about Lomachenko, like, what did he do overall to be on the pound-for-pound list for 5 years? That's just people that either A, once again, did not follow his career, or B, are very, very racially bitter like this dude right here. Just is what it is. Because Nicholas Walters had a lot of, great ranking and acclaim. And on top of that, so did Guillermo Rigondeaux, so did eventually Gary Russell Jr., as did some of the other fighters, Jorge Linares. So this guy asking why Lomachenko was on the pound-for-pound list for 5 years, I mean, it's really not that hard of a question to answer. But anyway.
People don't remember that. I will always remember that. I was counting.
Of course you were counting because you're a hater. like people say, overall hater, there's a very thin line between love and hate. Haters a lot of the times will pay attention to you more than what your fans do, because once again, they're preying on your downfall.
And I was waiting just for this time right here. I was counting.
You hear that? You hear what he just said? I've been waiting for this moment. Of course he's been waiting for this moment. He's like, that one person in the movie that, overall the villain that comes back in time for revenge. Like, he's like, the reverse Flash. For anyone that knows me knows that, I love comic books and I also love heroes. Like he's the reverse Barry Allen. He's the reverse Flash. Now, although I don't know as much about that storyline, I believe that eventually the reverse Flash, he pretty much dedicated his whole life to ruining the Flash's life. And eventually, I believe in one of the storylines, it ends up, creating a whole different reality. But to him, it's worth it as long as Barry Allen and the Flash, as long as he has a terrible life or as long as his life is completely destroyed. So it's like, this guy has been counting down the minutes. He's like that one villain in the movie that has just been super jealous and bitter.
So what did he do? See, it's easy to look at it now. It's easy to see that they was pump faking now. What did he do? Nothing. Absolute. The only thing.
Right. So a guy that's a 3-way division champion, a guy that once again had defeated the names that I had just listed, one of those fighters being on the top 5, the top 10 pound for pound list in Guillermo Rigondeaux. Also defeating a champion that, these guys love to push up in Gary Russell Jr. for having the most amount of title defenses in boxing at the time or some shit like that. Now all of a sudden they never mention him anymore. Isn't that interesting? And of course a multitude of other names, and only having like 21 fights. He's accomplished the most possibly out of any other fighter for the amount of fights that he's had. And on top of that, he was never a natural lightweight in the first place. He was really more of a natural junior lightweight. So, I mean, Lomachenko has done some great things in his career. Now, is he someone that eventually was proven as great as what some people tried to make him out to be? Probably not, but he still was a great fighter. So once again, like I said, it's not like Lomachenko is someone that is just untouchable in terms of legacy. He has criticisms, of course. But I mean, the thing is that this dude is just going too far with it. But we all know why that is.
That Lomachenko was, he was a pretty well-skilled fighter who happened to have blue eyes and pale skin.
You hear that? This guy basically, once again, he's telling you overall what his real problem is. I hate that this white boy or that this Caucasian was put above certain black fighters on the pound for pound list for such a long time, or promoted with certain black fighters that I find to be all-time great, like Floyd Mayweather or some other guys like that, or Ali, and I don't think he deserved to be there, and I think it was mainly because he had the complexion for the protection. So I'm bitter and pissed off about it. That's really all this video is about.
That's it. That's really it. That's where all the hype come from. The fastest, whatever champion, that ain't
Well, listen, it's a part of it. At the end of the day, to state that Lomachenko's package is also not somewhat mixed up with his race, of course, would be inaccurate. But that's why, once again, if you're going to be a logical commentator, you have to really take a look at that package and state, okay, is this something to where, that fighter or that particular athlete to where it's basically all of their package, and that's the only reason why they get that amount of great notoriety, or is it a part of it? Like, if we take a look at Patrick Mahomes right now, you notice that there's a lot of black commentators, especially like Stephen A. Smith and Shannon Sharp, who are starting to debate that he's the greatest, football player or the greatest quarterback of all time, which of course he's nowhere near close. And I'm not stating that, Patrick Mahomes, that in terms of all-around ability, that, he would not maybe debatably be there. But in terms of the greatest, what that would mean is that you have to be the most accomplished within your sport. And he is not. The greatest, quarterback of all time very clearly is Tom Brady. And Patrick Mahomes, to be quite honest with you, he's not even in second place because that would still be Joe Montana. Joe Montana has, the same amount of MVPs and one more championship. So, I mean, the point being is that they're getting a little bit excited because there's never been a quarterback that usually has been that dominant before that has been a black quarterback, overall. And, they're getting a little bit excited. They want him to be the greatest quarterback of all time. Because although, it's been very dominant in many of the black positions, such as running back or wide receiver, the main, important role that has always been looked at as the most important, which has been the quarterback, has been mainly Caucasians, especially because that is a leadership role. So they, of course, want Patrick Mahomes. That pretty much is the main thing they're missing. And they really want Patrick Mahomes to be looked at, or a black quarterback to be looked at as the clear greatest of all time. And right now, it's not there yet. But of course, does that mean that Mahomes can't be there? No, of course not. But that's like, if a Caucasian were to make a video on Patrick Mahomes and say he's completely overrated, he was never as good as what they tried to claim that he was, blah, blah, blah. And it's like, I mean, you can claim that to a degree, but it's like with Mahomes, there's only so much you can say with the amount of stats that he has and the quick start that he's had. I mean, honestly, Patrick Mahomes and Lomachenko, that's really, in all honesty, a great comparison. Now, I would claim, of course, that Mahomes is greater for his profession than what Lomachenko was for his. But I mean, Lomachenko did a lot of great things very early. Patrick Mahomes did as well. And he's still very quickly being regarded as the greatest quarterback of all time when he's not. And a part of the reason why is because he's looked at as a black quarterback. It's a part of his package, but that doesn't mean that he's still not a top 5 quarterback of all time. In my personal view, he is. He's someone that I would place above certain guys like John Elway or Roger Staubach, or Peyton Manning. He would be above those guys in my view. He wouldn't be above Tom Brady or Joe Montana, but, he would be above some of those other guys. So, you have to take a look at that from a logical perspective and see overall what their complete package is. And if you don't have the ability like this guy here, overall to link it in a logical, form, then I mean, I'm sorry, but you really shouldn't be commenting about it.
Ain't true. He never became.
But I like, once again, reviewing videos like this every once in a while because it gives me an opportunity to kind of address these narratives, to counter them, and put things in their proper perspective.
Undisputed. Anytime he is
and anyone that's, just as he's been waiting, I've been waiting to do this video as well because it's very obvious. It was very obvious that for years, when Lomachenko finally did retire, all the pro-black cult, the LDBC and new media, the super, bitter and racialized guys from these, media, new media channels, they were really, really, really going to wait for the day for Lomachenko to retire so they, of course, could tear down his complete career.
Stepped up in competition, he has lost.
Once again, that's not true. He ended up winning against Nicholas Walters. Now, people, of course, will mention Orlando Salido. Keep in mind that that was the second professional fight in Lomachenko's career. It's not like Lomachenko had 20 fights and ended up losing to Orlando Salido. It was the second fight of his career. Salido not only came in overweight for that fight, but low-blowed Lomachenko about 30 separate times, and was very dirty in that fight. And it still was a fight that could have potentially went either way. Although I still think that Salido probably deserved the edge, but Lomachenko probably would have beat him later on. He obviously became a greater version of himself later on. But these guys aren't going to mention that. Like, do people really believe that Salido was greater than Nicholas Walters or Rigondeaux or Linares when Lomachenko had fought him or Gary Russell Jr.? Like, give me a fucking break.
And on top of that, he has never avenged those losses. To add on top of that, he has had back-to-back title shots undeserving.
Right, but is Lomachenko really the only fighter that had that? Errol Spence went up to 154 and apparently, had the opportunity or was about to possibly get a title shot against Sebastian Fundora, although he had never fought there before. Now, I mean, of course, that fight didn't end up happening, but apparently, the sanctioning bodies were willing to possibly give Errol Spence that opportunity. So at the end of the day, Lomachenko was the guy that, yes, he was slightly pushed at the beginning of his career, also because of his amateur career. But I mean, the point is that there are exceptions for exceptional people. Lomachenko was one of those guys. But this dude is just trying to go along the narrative that every opportunity that Lomachenko got was just completely because he was a Caucasian. And no, that's not that's not really the truth. Not me stating overall that it was not a part of it, but just to state that that was all of his career, no.
Was any of that a lie? And is all that true? It's all true. So what did he do to be called better than... See, and when they use Muhammad Ali, they're not.
See, and this is really what he's bitter about. He's very bitter overall that Lomachenko, once again, was being put in the same realm as guys like Mayweather and Ali. And yes, his career overall, he's not, along those lines of those same fighters. I agree. But to just go along the lines of Lomachenko that his career is just a complete dud, I mean, no.
Use him just as a fight. They're trying to go at you as a people when they use Ali. Better than Muhammad Ali.
Well, are they really trying to go after you as a people? Or I mean, I understand what he's trying to state there because Of course, what they're really trying to do is that they want a Caucasian fighter to be remembered as the greatest in boxing history because they know that black fighters have mainly been the dominant force. Very similar to what a lot of the black commentators or black fans are doing with Patrick Mahomes or what they did with Tiger Woods in golf because they were not mainly the dominant force within those sports, at least at the quarterback position. I get it. But at the end of the day, the point is that once again, to go as far, like if we were to take a look at Tiger Woods, just because he doesn't overall have as many, Grand Slams or titles as Jack Nicklaus or Jack Nicklaus, however you pronounce his name, does that mean that his career is a quote unquote failure? Or that Tiger Woods is a complete failure because he's compared to Jack Nicklaus? No, of course not.
They couldn't stop at Floyd because, they get off on Floyd. He would have beat Floyd, and he's better than Ali. This is why I made the video about, do you notice they only compare Muhammad Ali to Caucasian fighters in boxing? Muhammad Ali, name is never used in comparison to another black fighter. Anybody ever peeped that?
Well, a lot of the times that can be the truth, but I'm not going to say in totality. I mean, there were certain times overall, where they were comparing, other fighters to Muhammad Ali, or I at least heard a lot of the LDBC and the media compare other black fighters to Ali. But I do agree overall with what he's stating there. It's very obvious that, a lot of the media or the powers that be, that they do want a Caucasian fighter, to be above the black force, within boxing, which has been dominant for so long. And to be fair, today there are, certain fighters from other countries, not even just the European or Caucasian countries, but other fighters from other countries, such as the Dominican Republic or, other places like that, to where they are starting to take over boxing a little bit more. So, I mean, a lot of these LDBC and the media channels, they can kind of see that and, they're getting a little bit uppity about it. But I mean, it is what it is.
And that's why I made a video about it. And I showed you person after person after person after person. You bring up Ali's name, it was next to a white guy, never a black guy. Show me. But this was part of the reason to make him artificial. Now, what happens is you may get a white boxing fan that hears this and they're immature or they're sensitive or maybe they a little bit, prejudice themselves. And they would say, me breaking this down to you is racist. But I kept telling people you can't truly talk about boxing until you talk about race, but nobody wanted to hear that.
I agree with that. Boxing is a very racialized sport. There's just, it's just a part of the game. That's just a part of boxing. But I mean, once again, that's why it's important overall. And that's why I like to commentate on these videos. I don't like to commentate on them as much anymore because it's just a little bit too much for me at this point with so much of the bitching that a lot of these guys do. But I mean, the thing is that once again, it's very important overall, once again, to kind of rank these things or talk about these things from an objective standpoint. And many people can't do that.
It was all you do is bring up race. Truthfully, all those people who have said that on people's platform, you need to go around and apologize, to be honest. Because
and I agree with that. I get a certain amount of these people from the LDBC and new media channels overall that always come on my channel and they say that, overall, oh, you're only disagreeing with this guy overall, when they talk about a black fighter, blah, 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 overall, you need to talk about this. Why are you talking about race? Those same people that always say, why are you talking about race? They're the main people that always talk about race. And, not only do I see a certain amount of those comments on LDBC channels, but I get a certain amount of these LDBC guys that always get pissed off at me overall for talking about either a Crawford or someone else that I say, in my view, does not have that great of a resume. But then whenever it comes to someone else that I may criticize, like an Inouye or someone else, they may not have a problem with it. So, I mean, it's just, everywhere. But anyway.
We've been telling you the whole time. But anyways, back to Loma. This is the only reason why he was presented to you as anything.
Well, no, that's not the only reason why he was presented as anything, but it was a part of the reason or the main reason why they tried to state overall that he was greater than Ali, or some of those other guys. I agree with that point.
So when I look at his career and I say it's a dud, am I lying?
Yes, you are lying. But I mean, it is what it is. But of course, you're talking about it in comparison overall to Ali or some of those other guys. But if you're going to put Lomachenko or compare him to Ali or some of those other guys and compare it as a dud, well, then overall, once again, you're already putting Lomachenko in a category that you yourself say he doesn't deserve to be at. So that doesn't make any sense. So we can't, rank Lomachenko. If you don't believe that Lomachenko deserves to be along the same lines as a Mayweather or an Ali, well, then that means we have to put him a level or two below. So where Lomachenko, where he really deserves to be in terms of a ranking, is against certain fighters like Miguel Cotto, Juan Manuel Marquez, probably, maybe Marco Antonio Barrera, Eric Morales, Oscar De La Hoya, Sugar Shane Mosley, certain guys like that. Like a great argument or a great debate would be who's greater between Sugar Shane Mosley and Lomachenko. That would really be a great debate. The reason why I kind of say those two and not some of the other ones is because Lomachenko, although he did do some great things in his career was a little bit short, which wasn't completely his fault, of course. He had a long amateur career, and some of the other names that he could have gotten in the ring with. Although, of course, the last portion of his career, he definitely didn't get in the ring with them. When he was at his peak years, some of the names like Gervonta Tank Davis and Mikey Garcia, to be quite honest with you, they really weren't rushing to get in the ring with him.
I'm not being vicious, facetious, or anything.
Well, that's not true. Yes, you are, but it is what it is. Anyway.
When I'm saying this, I'm just breaking down what people like to either hide behind or maybe they just can't see. But I don't believe people are that blind. I believe a lot of people, y'all know exactly what he is.
What Lomachenko is, once again, is that he's a great fighter, but he's not someone that is on the Ali or Mayweather level. Now, when this guy says that he's not being facetious or anything like that, all that's bullshit, because he's trying to make it seem like Lomachenko's career is just a complete failure. And no, it's not. Once again, is he on the Ali or Mayweather level? No, he's not. But he is debatably on some of the other levels. Like I said, he could debatably be, around, the Eric Morales or Sugar Shane Mosley level.
This is why y'all didn't want him to fight Devin Haney. And this is where the true hate from Devin Haney comes from. Because he said he wasn't going to lose to a white boy, and he didn't.
Right, and it is not very interesting how Devin Haney said that. If overall Lomachenko had said that overall that he would never lose to a black boxer, do you know the uproar that would end up happening with a lot of these LDBC and new media channels? Once again, no offense against a lot of these LDBC and new media channels, but these guys are very representative of the most sensitive and pretty much bitchy ass demographic overall in all of America and pretty much the whole entire world. Which is basically, that very bitchy, constant complaining minority community within that of America, just is what it is, and I know a lot of people are not going to like that, but that's just the way it is. That's why you have so many of these LDBC and new media guys, making so many excuses, for their favorite fighters like Deontay Wilder. But then when it comes to other fighters that they don't like, there's no excuses for them. It's very representative, once again, of a lot of those communities making excuses for themselves. No matter what ends up happening, never taking self-accountability, which is why their lives never improve.
But notice they tried to make Ryan Garcia white when the time was right. You see how fucking
Well, I definitely don't remember that, but anyway.
Who do y'all think y'all be getting with this shit? Because you definitely don't miss me. I see all people's little short and boxing is so much psychology. Even from being a fan's perspective, it's not even funny. People are insecure, but nonetheless, this little guy is retired, as he should be, because truthfully, he got put between a rock and a hard place.
I agree with that, and there was really no way that Lomachenko, in my view, really should continue on fighting at 37 years old. At a weight class that he really was not naturally really at there anyway. And on top of that, it was really only going to be a matter of time to where he was going to have to take some of those bigger fights against Shakur Stevenson or Keyshawn Davis or Gervonta Tank Davis. And to be quite honest with you, I don't know if he would have won any of those ones, at least at this stage in his career. Now, maybe had it been at his peak years, maybe, but the question will be about Lomachenko is that could he have maybe beaten some of those guys? I think with Teofimo Lopez and, with Devin Haney, that those guys were clearly about a weight class or two bigger than him, at least a little bit, at least especially Devin Haney. But with Gervonta Tank Davis and Shakur, they would have been more his size. So it would have been interesting to see how, had they fought during their prime years or peak years. But, Of course, Lomachenko, the question is always going to be about him is that, would he have potentially beaten those guys? And of course, a lot of his fans would say yes, but there is no guarantee to that.
And nobody wants
And even though Lomachenko is very highly skilled, there are some holes in this game.
to admit it. Because when it's time for him to be what y'all said that he was always going to be and should have been, you found out he wasn't. Y'all didn't want to see it no more. Okay? Gervonta Tank Davis, the fight was waiting there for him. And I wanted to see it, but guess who didn't want to see it? Loma fans. Is it that interesting?
Well, actually, Lomachenko fans have been calling for that fight about 10 years ago. But it was actually many of the LDBC and new media fans that claimed that Gervonta Tank Davis, that he was at a lower weight class and that Lomachenko, instead of fighting him, that he needs to fight some other guys. So, although we can criticize Lomachenko for recently turning down the Gervonta Tank Davis fight, and that is something that's very relevant, let's also not forget that in past times prior, that Lomachenko did call out Gervonta Tank Davis multiple times, and basically anytime Lomachenko was brought up around Gervonta Tank Davis, he basically would piss his pants. And same thing about Mikey Garcia. No offense against Mikey Garcia. But, if we want to compare, for example, when you talk about a career that's a quote-unquote dud, at least a career overall that when you want to talk about someone who's a four-way division champion, although no one ever talks about it, we got to talk about Mikey Garcia. No offense against Mikey Garcia, but what big names did Mikey Garcia really ever beat? I mean, he beat some names that have been looked at as decent, like Robert Easter and Adrian Broner and, Zlatan Satichning or whatever the fuck that dude's name was. But he never defeated any legit names with any actual weight to them. He never defeated Gamboa or Nicholas Walters or Devin Haney or, any of those other names or Lomachenko. And Lomachenko wanted to get in the ring with him. Now, of course, what a certain amount of these channels would state is that, Lomachenko turned down a fight. Right, but the reason why he turned down a fight is because he realized that Mikey Garcia would be a super fight and then he'd have to be on his A game. And he was just coming off of a torn shoulder injury. And Mikey Garcia knew that shit. So Mikey, like the snake that he is, he basically said, I'm going to call Lomachenko out at his weakest point, and then overall, if he says no, then I'm just overall going to go up and, claim that I wanted the fight with Lomachenko, which is bullshit because Lomachenko was calling him out again after that, and Mikey relinquished his WBC title, but that never gets talked about.
Oh, he's older. Crawford older than him and Usyk older than him. And speaking of Usyk...
Right, but not everyone has the same wear and tear.
The one that y'all overlooked, the one that y'all didn't give no attention to, that didn't care about, which is very funny because they care so much about somebody being white and being skilled, but for some reason, y'all totally ignored Usyk, and he turned out...
So then maybe it's not completely about the complexion. Maybe it's something about Lomachenko or with him being in the lower weight classes.
To be everything you wanted Lomachenko to be, and a heavyweight in the end. There go that car with that muffler. Jesus.
And if you do compare someone to Ali or the Mayweather level, in my view, when you're talking about a fighter of this generation that would deserve to be on that level, it would debatably have to be Usyk, even debatably more, possibly, than a Canelo or a Crawford. Although that's debatable because Usyk didn't have quite as long of a career. But I mean, Usyk, if you want to debate him with Ali or some of those other guys, or debate him as a top 20 to top 10 fighter of all time, I mean, I'll personally state this: he definitely is more worthy of the conversation than Tommy Hearns, just in my view.
Jesus Christ. He turned out to be everything that they wanted Loma to be. All of it. At the end of the day, Vasyl Lomachenko got nothing from boxing.
No, that's not the case. But, once again, that doesn't surprise me with any of these channels overall stating that because they've been waiting for this day for a very long time. But anyway.
He didn't become undisputed. He doesn't have some stellar resume. He hasn't done anything or beat an opponent that truly stands out or has a standout fight.
Well, that's basically a lie. But I mean, it is what it is. I've already explained earlier. But I mean, what I will state is that you can claim that the two biggest notable opponents that he did fight, he did lose to. That is one thing that you can state. But to say that he's never beaten any names that stand out or gotten significant wins, that's, of course, that's not the case. But anyway.
And the one thing that was left that he could achieve and get from boxing was maybe one of the highest paydays that he ever seen in his boxing career. He also leaves boxing without that also. The point is, Vasyl Lomachenko retires with absolutely nothing from boxing. It was almost like there was no purpose to him boxing at all.
Right, there was no purpose to him boxing, although he's a three-weight division champion and he's someone that defeated a multitude of A-grade level names. Like, come on, dude.
Because what did his career say? What did he add? Who did he fight? What money did he make? What legacy did he make? What records did he break? What? Nothing, 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 and nothing. He leaves boxing completely empty-handed.
This dude really thought that he dropped the mic there. But anyways, that pretty much is about it for today. But, Lomachenko, I think that he retired at the right time. And the thing is about Lomachenko is that this really was the best time to retire because I don't think his heart was completely in it anymore. And his career is going to have a little bit more mystique around it, wondering if he could have potentially defeated the likes of Mikey Garcia or Gervonta Tank Davis. And I think that it was the perfect time to retire because the only two losses that he had as of recent were to Teofimo Lopez and Devin Haney. A lot of people thought that he could have potentially won the Devin Haney fight. And on top of that, when it comes down to it, those guys were clearly bigger than him. So, I mean, there's always going to be a little bit of mystique around Lomachenko's career. I don't go off of a ranking off of mystique. I go off of results. So Lomachenko is someone that can't ever be on the Mayweather or Ali level or something like that, or even quite on the Usyk or Canelo or Crawford level in my view. But he's someone that, if you wanted to debate him somewhere around the Shane Mosley level or something like that, I could see it. But even then it would be a bit hard to debate because his career wasn't quite long enough. But, that pretty much is about it for today. But thank you guys so much for watching. We'll see where this goes. But that pretty much is about it for today. I just wanted to talk about that because I know that so many of these people overall that they've, been waiting for this day. But that pretty much is about it for today. Thank you all so much for watching. I'll talk to you all later. But to kind of talk about Lomachenko's career, great fighter, all-time great level fighter. I mean, it's a debate. It depends on what your definition of an all-time great level fighter is. In my view, maybe around the same level as a Shane Mosley or a Miguel Cotto, maybe a little bit below, somewhere around there. Someone who was a great fighter, but, someone that, of course, wasn't ever on the level of a Ali or a Mayweather, or proved not to be. But anyways, that pretty much overall is about it for today. Thank you all so much for watching, and I'll talk to you all later.